Thank you everybody for joining us during this afternoon, evening, morning, whatever time it happens to be. This is the third event of 2021 that the btrax US team has put on. The btrax Japan team has been doing some really fun events also. And today, as you probably noticed from the event title, is all about uncovering Japan. So we're going to be discussing kind of basically market research, user research, best practices, insights from a couple of different perspectives. Let me make sure. And so, yeah, I'm super excited. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We've purposely tried to leave plenty of time for Q&A because topics like this typically have lots of questions after hearing the speakers. And so we're going to spend maybe 15 to 20 minutes on each speaker. Chika Mori kicking it off, Yuriko Sanno going next, and then Shota, Adam and I are going to be doing a little fireside chat. In the meantime, you may know this, but I'll be quick on this part. btrax has some content. So we have a few ebooks that we've created over the years. So if you're just basically interested in understanding various aspects of Japan, these are free. So if you just go to our website or go to btrax.com, on the top menu, we do have an ebook section. So that out of the way, I want to be quick about this because we're starting a little late and I want to make sure that our speakers have time to talk. Today we have Chika Mori, Yuriko Sanno, and Shota Adam speaking. So Chika's at btrax. She's a business designer and marketing manager. She's basically been helping brands serve in both US and Japanese by providing business strategy, cross-cultural branding, and she's going to be covering some basics, initially kind of covering what market research is, kind of the process, and giving a case study from some work that was done in Japan. Yuriko will be going next, and she is a design researcher at btrax. Really cool. She's from Japan, but she's lived all over, and she's finishing up a cognitive science degree at UCLA. And I won't give too much away because I know that she'll be talking a little bit about herself. And then Shota Adam, I've spoken with before. I've actually known about his company for a few years. Actually, btrax helped them launch in Japan. He basically leads marketing for the furniture lifestyle brand Koala. So some of you're going to learn about Koala today because I don't know, if this is a US centric audience and you're not familiar of the breadth of like what Koala has done in Japan, get ready to be educated. So I'm super excited to be asking him some questions about how they've done market research. And he's experienced in the challenges of market entry in a retail environment, his background, and he basically was the first in-market leader of Koala in Japan. So without further ado, I would like to kick it off to Chika-san, who will be sharing a little bit more about market research in Japan.
Yes, thank you, John. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen properly?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, hopefully, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chika from Tokyo. I'm a business designer and marketing manager at btrax. So for today, I will share about the best practice and some case studies and market research. So before going to that topic, let me quickly introduce ourselves, btrax. Probably some of you guys already know, but we are a design agency specializing in Japan and the US. And this is our official vision. We bridge the gaps. We bridge the gaps between culture, between ages, between genders, stuff like that. And these are some clients we've worked with in the past. As you can see, some are traditional Japanese company and some are US startup company. So we've worked with quite a lot of types of companies just to help them grow. So market research. Let's have a look at whole journey of market entry itself. at first. So as you can see, this is a whole journey of the market entry. We first do discover, define, and going to design and validate UX, and explore and growth. And as you can see, research is the very first step within the whole journey for go-to-market. And in other words, this is quite important. This is the key of the success of market entry itself. So what do you imagine when we say market research? You may come up with about competitors or trends, market culture, like how people behave when they buy a product in that market. Or it could be more like quantitative research, like user demographic or market size. So these are all a piece of market research, of course. But the important thing is, I believe all of them can be categorized into two components. So one is brand component. The other one is market user insight. So brand component here means like vision and mission and strengths and weakness. It's more like why your brand exists for and what you want to achieve with your brand. So what's important here is realizing and understanding your brand itself, once again. And market user insight is quite simple. Yeah. Some are the facts from quantitative research, and some are the findings from user interview or surveys from target users, what pain and gain they have in the market. So Yuriko will cover like what and how on user research. So I will skip that part, but it's quite important. So based off these two components, brand value proposition can be identified. So this is the most important and main purpose of the research, I believe. Yeah, let's have a look at case study, how we're gonna make value proposition. So today, I wanna introduce about the case study on brain sleep. But I guess most of you guys are not familiar with this brand because it's a Japanese brand and kind of new. So, but I want to share this as one of the best practice because they are the sleep-related product company. But in Japan, bedding industry is quite large, but at the same time, there are already some leading brands and they have large share already. So it seems like a bit difficult for new brand to enter the market, but they did really well. So these are the actual products they produce. So as you may notice, it's a little bit seems unique in terms of fabric, like grass noodle and shapes as well. But it's all like evidence-based product. Actually, one of their CEO named Dr. Nishino, he's in Stanford Uni and he's a director for sleep medicine, sleep science and medicine. So technically, their CEO is in the best place in the world for studying sleep. So their products are all based on his research. So they're so why to have this fabric, why to have this shape has all meanings. And what was brand components and market user insights of brain sleep? So as brand component, their mission is to support users' high performance by providing a good sleep. And they also proud of evidence-based product. It's actually one of the strengths. And how about key insights? As a fact, we found out Japanese are one of the shortest sleepers within developed countries. Surprisingly, it's same for children. And second one is about what we got from user interview. But users cannot imagine like how their lifestyle will get better by good sleep. So it's easy for them to imagine that like a regular workout or healthy meal help them a lot, but not sleep. And also from competitor research, we found out most of existing products are required to be cleaned by professionals. It means like if you want to clean it, we need to bring it into a dry cleaner, so we cannot wash it at home. But when we do a user interview, we found out like people feels it's too much hassle, even if it's once a season. So there is a gap between what current brand provides and what people are feeling. So we use this content as an input for value proposition. And here it is. So we came up with this as value proposition for brain sleep. One is lifestyle functionality. This is about functionality is obvious on their product, but at the same time, we aim to have their brand image as stylish. So for most of the Japanese betting company who have large share in the market, it's common to use athletes like Shohei Ohtani as an image model, just to appeal that this product provides you high performance. So they're really focusing on the functionality only. So it's quite new to the market, being a lifestyle brand at the same time. Second, be educational and inspirational. This is, yeah, again, their evidence-based product is only one, but at the same time, users really understand what's important for good sleep. So it's valuable for them to educate. Is that okay? Yeah, so it's okay. It's valuable to share the information like what's important for good sleep, that kind of things, and provide them a successful experience in good sleep. Then it's eventually connects to why people choose brain sleep. And last one is about easy to clean. Yeah. So again, the products from brain sleep can be washed at home. It means we can wash our comforter in laundry, and we can use just shower to clean our pillows or mattress. So it solves the pain point which users have in the market. So lastly, this is just an example that value proposition is a key in the following steps, which is marketing and PR. So Brain Sleep is actually collaborating with kindergarten. So it's a little bit why, probably, you feel. But there is an affinity between them that both wants to support children's health and growth in some way. So what I want to say here is good and right value proposition can be used in promotion and marketing as well. So which is quite important as well. Yeah. Yep. This is the last slide of my presentation. Let me quickly brief what I want to say in this presentation. Research is the very first step of market entry. It's key to succeed market entry itself. And research is to understand not only the market users, but also brand itself. and to find the value proposition as the most important purpose of the research. Yeah. I went a little bit quick in my presentation. So if you are interested in more details or if you want to know more case studies, feel free to contact me via email or LinkedIn, whatever. Yeah. And thank you very much for listening. I'll pass it to Yuriko. She's going to cover more cross-cultural marketing things. Thank you.
Thank you, Chika. So that was kind of a great overview of some of the processes around market research. I believe that we are preaching to the choir, I'm assuming, about everybody's understanding that market research needs to happen, or user research, especially if you're entering the Japanese market, to understand the value proposition. So we kind of want to start from that point. It will be interesting, like as you noticed, Brain Sleep was the case study. We're also speaking with another sleep company representative. So I'm excited to kind of talk to Shota a little bit about that, because he understands how to do the research also around like the value proposition stuff. But in the meantime, I'm going to share the screen for Yuriko, who will be sharing some interesting cross-cultural differences. And we will be, thank you for asking some questions. We'll be going over them after each of the speakers. So please hold. Does everybody see my screen? I'm looking, I see some heads nodding. All right, I see some thumbs up. Thank you. Yuriko Sanno, it is all yours.
Hi, I'm Yuriko, and I'm a design researcher at btrax, and I'll be presenting the cross-cultural differences in user research. Go to the next slide, please. Okay. So before we begin, I would like to tell a little bit about myself. So kind of John already mentioned this, I'm from Japan, but I've lived abroad quite a bit. I spent my middle and high school in Singapore and France. You kind of see the pictures like on the right side. That's me in high school doing track at Singapore. And then I visited quite some places. So on the left one, that's like a rural Sabruin in Cambodia. I visited quite a bit for both trips, but also for my NGO. And then now I currently study cognitive science at UCLA. I've done a lot of like social cognition research, and that's kind of how I got into this like whole user research and UX industry, because they're very, very like closely related. At university, I spent a lot of time with the Japanese Student Association and helping students with like the recruitment stuff. I joined btrax this summer, and since then I've worked on several market entry projects. So I conducted market and user research in Japan, but I also helped a little bit with US as well. So I'll be giving this presentation from that perspective. Next slide, please. So it's kind of, it's going to be a lot of content. So to kind of summarize what I'll be covering is, again, just kind of the cross-cultural differences in the user research. I'll be especially talking about this from the context of user interview, but many of the concepts will apply to any sort of like quantitative and qualitative methods. Next slide, please. So kind of right off the bat, like the biggest message that I want to send, like the takeaway for this presentation, is that you really must localize your research and all the materials that you're using in your interview. And from now on, I'll be explaining like why that's the case. So I'll be talking about this from mainly three perspectives. So the three aspects of the user interview. First one being recruiting. If you go to the next slide, the scripting. And then lastly, the conducting of the interview. So there'll be three sections. Okay. So first with recruiting. So first about the methodology for recruiting. So the US is quite unique in that the UX industry is very, very advanced. So there are a lot of tools and services that are specifically for user research. So there are like dedicated panels, dedicated like recruitment services or recruiting panels. But there's also a lot of like user testing platforms that have integrated recruitment services. Another thing that's unique about US is that you can conduct man on the street interview, meaning like you can just grab someone off the street and then ask interview. And that kind of works in the US, which is not something you really see in other countries. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in Japan, like that methodology wouldn't work because Japanese people aren't really open to conversing to strangers, especially in cities. So the man on the interview wouldn't work. And generally speaking, the recruitment process is going to be quite different from the US. because the concept of user research is pretty new in Japan, so there aren't that many services that are specialized in user research. So currently, the most common way of recruiting is done through market research agencies. And it's interesting because a lot of the major companies that are, some are listed here, share a research panel. So they kind of share the data set. So meaning that there actually isn't that many variation in the sample size. But I guess like some companies do have certain, they have strength in like certain demographics over like other companies. Though recently some like American and European user research platform have expanded into Japan and are trying to get more Japanese participants, but the sample is still not great, so it's still not there yet to kind of overthrow the agencies. Occasionally, we also use crowdsourcing sites when the target isn't as niche, but it's kind of hard to get like evenly distributed group, especially like for ages and gender. So we tend to avoid using these as much. Slide, please. There are a couple of other things to keep in mind when when recruiting in Japan that may be a little bit different from US. Is first of all, when you're doing an interview on weekday or daytime, you may have more like housewives over working moms, and that's just a cultural thing. You still have more male working than the woman, and so if you want more writing segment, you may have to consider working on the weekends. Though I feel like this is now less of a trend since COVID because online interviews is more common. The second thing is that a lot of the people in the industry aren't tech savvy. So occasionally you have to call to set up the interview and also conduct the interview. So I definitely had this with one of my client project. I had to call the stakeholders because they weren't replying to my emails and they were very, very confused about seeing it on Zoom. So I had to consider, conducting it on the Google Meet where they don't have to download anything. They can just click on the link. The last thing to consider is that a lot of Japanese people just don't speak English. So you have to make sure that all your communication are in Japanese. And this also goes for market research agencies as well. So if you're communicating with them and working with recruitment, you may have to just speak or hire someone who speaks Japanese for that as well. Another thing to consider is the demographics. So US is a diverse country, so there are a lot of factors to consider, such as ethnicity and geography. So let's say you're taking someone from North Carolina and New York, they're gonna have a very, very different lives, whether it's transportation or even education or like political views. So next slide, please. However, in Japan, it's obviously there are some diversity, but it's not as much compared to US, and it's there are less factors to consider than compared to US. People mostly go through similar education system, not a lot of ethnicity diversity. Most people aren't bilingual and so on. One thing to consider though is the geographical area, so like urban versus rural, because the lives could be pretty different between the two. So for example, like transportation is obviously different. The age difference. So in the rural area, the population is much, much older and the density is quite different too. So if you have ever heard, Tokyo is one of the most density in the world, populated city in the world. And so, but the rural area is there aren't that many people. So you're gonna see how that will play into kind of the differences in the lifestyle. Okay. Lastly, looking at the cost. So this is kind of comparing the most common methods in both countries and doing a comparison between the cost. And you can kind of see the compensation is actually lower for Japan, probably in part because the industry is still undeveloped, so the standard isn't really set yet. But because there is the recruitment aspect, the overall cost could be higher depending on like the demographic you're targeting. And also given that in the US now, the shorter, more like unmoderated interviews are getting more common, meaning that you don't need a moderator and people simply just follow like instructions and they just record themselves on doing that. That is that's cheaper. So generally speaking, Japan, you can expect that it might be more expensive to do user research. And also because there is that recruitment aspect, you can expect that sometimes the project itself can take longer as well than the US. Okay. So now onto the scripting interview. Okay. So when writing the script or for the interview, you can't just translate the materials that was written in English and hope that it works because you have to consider the kind of cultural background of the tools and the terminologies that are being used. So one thing, for example, is SMS. So I know the SMS communication is pretty widely used in the US. I know companies like IKEA, Target, and many other major companies use SMS to send out coupons and promotions and reminders and so on. And we use this quite often in our daily communication as well. However, this is not something that's used as frequently in Japan. SMS is kind of only used for verification purposes, and usually companies communicate through emails or even line occasionally. So, if you have a question that's kind of relating to SMS and like marketing and so on, that might not translate well, and you might consider including appropriate options like Line. Oh, and Line is for those who are not familiar, it's like a personal messaging app that's commonly used in Japan. Okay. And this kind of goes for basically like overall like social media as well. So you kind of see the distribution of social media use and how that's different from US. So as I mentioned, Line, it's like a WhatsApp basically, but it's like essential for day-to-day communication. It's almost like infrastructure at this point, given the number of people who use it. But I know like in WhatsApp, for example, in US, only 23% people use it. So you can kind of see the difference. Also, Twitter is quite used in Japan, and it's kind of unique how they use it. People use it to get real-time information and also like real and honest opinion. And it comes from this unique aspect of Japan where it's not common to state your opinion publicly, but there's obviously still desire to express your opinion. And traders appreciate it because it's anonymous, but it's a platform where you can still share your opinion. So it's used quite differently from the US. So when writing script kind of relating to all these like tools and social media, you want to be aware of these contexts and how they're being used. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. You also want to be careful with the language you're using. So it's interesting because in Japanese, there's this thing called katakana, which is like a type of writing and character. And it's used for a lot of the loan words from foreign languages. So for example, like social media, you can basically kind of write this out in katakana and call it, this is pronounced like social media. So phonetically it's basically the same and it works for a lot of cases. However, the term usually in Japan, instead of social media, we use SNS more. So you want to actually use that word instead of like social media. So you want to be careful with the words you're using. Next slide, please. And you want to also be aware of the context, again, of each terminologies. So in US, when you say social media, people wouldn't be too surprised to kind of associate like WhatsApp as social media. They wouldn't be too surprised with that opinion and they would like easily associate with that. However, in Japan, and actually in some of my client projects that I had, I realized that people do associate like Instagram and Twitter with SNS, but not so much with Line. And you have to kind of make sure that Line is included in SNS to make sure that you're really asking for that. And I think it comes with the fact that the Line is more of like a private space and private communication, so they get kind of confused with that. So I can kind of learn the context of the H terms and so that you know like how your questions are being perceived by the users. Okay. And you also want to be careful of not using the katakana words too much, and because it's kind of hard for Japanese users to comprehend, and also it could be kind of considered a snobby at times. It's not it doesn't give off a great impression. And the reason why I say this is because a lot of non-Japanese companies do this, even the ones that are like pretty big in Japan and are really localized. So this is actually a job description that I found recently. And it's from a big company that's very localized in Japan. But all the red letters are the katakana words. And it's obviously too much. I speak English and it's too much. So it's obviously going to be too much for anyone else. And this will not be perceived well from the Japanese users. On the right side is actually like an app, and it's like a store name. The one above is a Chinese character and the one below is a Chinese character but in Japanese. And the difference is very, very small. But when these kind of like differences kind of come throughout, like through the entirety of the app, it'll start to get weird and people will notice that. And people have expressed that it makes them look unreliable. So that's kind of like that sensitivity is the kind of thing you're dealing with. And so you just want to make sure that your script is looked over by an actual Japanese person and that it's actually in the right tone. Let me grab a drink. Okay, so lastly, about conducting an interview. So some of the characteristics of Japanese respondents that may be a little bit different from the US is that they're very difficult to open up at first, and also kind of stating and discussing your honest opinion to a stranger is not a common practice, and that's something you're definitely going to see when you're conducting an interview. Okay, next slide, please. So for example, in focus group interview, US participants wouldn't hesitate to have a discussion. So in the focus group works, and the moderator just need to be making sure that the discussion is on track. Whereas in Japan, it won't exactly go that same way. So sometimes you find people just agreeing with one opinion and not really like discussing on it, or they simply wait until the question is asked by the moderator. So it's at this point, it's not even discussion, it's just kind of like 101, but it's done in a group setting. So the moderator will really have to try to make the place really comfortable and ask a lot of questions. But this is like very, very hard to do. And at btrax, I don't think we ever really do a focus group interview because we haven't really found it to be effective. So in terms of like in-depth interview, you kind of see a similar trend. So in the US, the participants wouldn't be too afraid to share their opinions. And if you ask a question, they would talk extensively on their own, which is why the unmoderated and the read aloud, which is essentially, you're just like kind of saying your thoughts out loud as you kind of look over the service or the UI. So that actually works in the US because they talk a lot on their own without really asking a lot of follow-up questions. But that wouldn't work the same way in Japan. When we do an interview, the first thing I hear a lot is like, oh, like, I don't know if I can be helpful, or like, oh, am I answering it like appropriately? Am I answering it correctly? Those are kind of some things that you'll hear a lot in the interview. So you have to make sure that to kind of follow up with them, and that, we're not testing you and we're honestly just looking to hear your honest experiences and so on. You have to really try to make them feel comfortable. Okay, next slide, please. Kind of similar to what I just said, but basically people in the US are going to be used to sharing their feelings and opinions and basically making their decisions based on that, on whether to not use service. So this is kind of an extreme example, but I know a lot of people don't eat Chick-fil-A because of its philosophy. And they're very vocal about it too, on like why they're not supporting it. But that's not something you'll see commonly in Japan. Because expressing your opinion like super out loud in public is not really too much of a cultural thing. And you also notice that people will avoid taking extreme stances in general. So this is on the right side, it's an NPS score, the differences between the liking, disliking of the company. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, NPS is like a score on how much the respondents are willing to recommend a service to another person. So you can see that US, the gap is pretty big, meaning that some people would like it. They would, if they like it, they would express that they would like it. And if they don't like it, they would strongly express that they don't like it. But you can see that the discrepancy is pretty low for Japan, meaning that people tend to take a middle ground in a lot of these options, even if they like the service. So you really have to dig deep and ask a lot of follow-up questions to kind of get their honest opinion and why they like a certain service or not. Next slide, please. So to kind of summarize and to kind of counter some of the things when conducting the interview for a Japanese participant is, first, you must ask a lot of icebreaking questions. I know you do this in the US too, but this has to be kind of more well thought out and more extensive into Japanese participants. And not just like asking icebreaking questions, but generally you have to try to make them feel comfortable. Like, for example, you would probably not a lot, thank them for the responses, validate the responses. You can also choose to talk casually at times. So there's a formal way of talking in Japanese, but that could be sometimes intimidating and make it a little bit distant between you and the respondent. So you can sometimes try to talk a little bit casually occasionally to make it a little bit more comfortable. You also want to remind them again and again that there is no right or wrong answer and that honesty is needed for the product's improvement. And so sometimes what I do is like, you can just say that, oh, I want to hear both the positive and negative aspects of the service, and it can be anything. And I would just say that so that they would be more comfortable with sharing the negative side of the service, for example. And lastly, like, you want to be prepared to have a lot of follow-up and backup question for the reasons that I explained earlier. And because you have to do a lot of this, just expect that your interview might be longer than the ones you conduct in the US as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so to kind of summarize everything that I just said, again, you must localize your research so that, have a local person look over your research so that your materials that you're using, everything is in the right terminologies and it's using the right tone, and also adopt appropriate mannerism in approaching and also talking with the Japanese participants. Okay. That'll be all from me. So thank you so much. And if you have any more questions, please ask me in the Q&A session. Thank you.
I was muted. Thank you very much, Yuriko. I hope everybody has found some really great insights from the first two presentations. I know, even though I've been working at btrax for quite a few years, I learned something from the presentations. I'm really excited for this next portion of the event, where Shota and I will be chatting a little bit about Koala and the work that he's been doing in Japan. I was actually thinking, what three things can I do to make him feel more comfortable, such as asking him an icebreaker question. And so, but first, let's jump right in. Shota, why don't you initially provide kind of like a self-introduction, tell us a little bit about Koala, and then I'll jump in with some questions to ask you.
Sure. Hey, John. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Thank you for your time. My name is Shota. I'm half Japanese, half Aussie, living in Tokyo. I was lucky enough to be the first person to launch Koala into Japan back in 2017. So to tell you about Koala, we're a direct-to-consumer furniture company from Sydney, Australia. We actually launched as a brand in 2015, and then we launched into Japan in 2017. We've also launched in Korea as of this year in July, which is a very exciting new venture for us. We began very much as a mattress direct-to-consumer bed-in-a-box type company. For everyone in the US, I'm sure you would have seen the American online mattress retailers. That probably might give you a little bit of background. But now we've evolved to more of a full furniture, full home offering. We're very much in the bedroom, the living room, dining room. And there's obviously interesting challenges around how you do that in Japan versus Australia versus Korea. So that's a really fun thing for us at the moment. We were actually the first bed-in-a-box brand in Japan. So we had the job of essentially educating the market around the whole point of, why would you purchase a mattress online, which is obviously a very interesting challenge given Japan is historically, as mentioned in the previous conversation, it is quite a conservative, consensus-based customer. So how do you educate them about doing something brand new, essentially? We've been successful with that. In terms of the name Koala, it comes from the fact that the animal koala actually sleeps 19 hours a day. So they're essentially the gods of sleep. And we also do a lot around sustainability and helping the planet. So for every mattress that is sold, we actually have a partnership with the WWF where we symbolically adopt a koala to save them. They're an endangered species. So we do a lot around that. And for all our other products, we also have partnerships for different animals as well. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to it.
All right, so everybody's up to date on Koala now, and I'm excited to kind of talk to you about, I'll be honest, btrax helped you guys when you initially launched in Japan. So at that time, I remember working on this project and thinking, oh, well, I would have never even considered some of these kinds of things if we hadn't done market and user research. But I'm going to put that aside for a sec and ask you, how has the market user research that you guys do changed during COVID? Because
it's definitely
a topical question.
Definitely. It's had a lot of changes. As a direct-to-consumer brand, we have talking to the customer on a daily basis and conducting regular insights is really, really important. We're very iterative with everything we do. We tend to actually launch a product and then a year later, based on insights, upgrade them. And the fact that, a lot of that comes from, focus sessions, actual ethnographic research. So for example, in year 1 and 2, we actually went to customers' houses, including myself, and talked to them directly about, what are the issues they're having around sleep, the home, etc. Suddenly we weren't able to do that due to COVID. So that caused challenges for us. So we essentially had to shift everything online, which initially, I'll be honest, we didn't really know how to do it, but we essentially started to create online communities of customers who we could talk to on a regular basis. And it's been very, very successful. The fact that it's online, even though in the beginning it was challenging because we couldn't physically meet them, there's obviously barriers around, I guess, breaking the ice, as Yuriko mentioned. But over the course of time, it actually meant we could do it more frequently because of the online interactions. And it's led to quite a lot of new insight for us. So in the end, it's been quite successful. So yeah, we're very happy with the results so far.
Awesome. And, how has the kind of market user research that you guys have been doing, not looking at COVID, but just in general, like you were the first bed in a box brand initially. So I remember doing a lot of research around, everything from, what kind of education needed to happen to also addressing issues like what happens to the old mattress, like you're talking about changing a consumer habit in some ways. The bigger you've gotten in Japan, the more products you've launched. How has the research changed in terms of like the messaging? That's part. I'll stop there and let you answer that question.
In terms of, I guess we'll firstly talk on process. So in the beginning, obviously it was me just here, and we worked with btrax. Over the course of time, we've grown the team out. So in Australia, we actually have a global in-house research team now. And they essentially function like an in-house agency. They can conduct qualitative, quantitative insights on a pretty regular basis. That's been very, very helpful. They're a global team, but they're based in Australia to ensure there is an actual local Japanese voice. We have regular catch-ups with this team. You need to make sure the local team's voice is heard. Obviously, the home is quite different. And honestly, with COVID, one of the challenges has been that because they haven't been able to physically fly to Japan, educating them around, obviously homes are smaller in Japan, for example, versus Australia, and really showing them the differences. That's been a really interesting challenge for us. That's probably been a big thing for us. We've also developed what we would call a world-class voice of customer program, where we talk to the customer and our customer service team on a regular basis to really understand what's evolving essentially within the customer. To give you one example, we have 30 people now in the Japan team in Koala, but 10 people are customer service, and you can talk to them daily as a customer via, you can phone, there's email, there's also online chat. So we're constantly in the loop with our customers. So that kind of live information sharing has been really, really beneficial for us. And we didn't have that in the beginning. So that's been a big thing for us. And then in terms of how it's evolved in terms of how we grow the business, in the beginning, it was very much around just understanding, how do we actually make our product relevant, and, finding messages that actually might work. You obviously learn and you iterate a lot. But now that it's evolved, it's more around how do we improve our service offering. So for example, in Australia, we do 4-hour delivery. If you're in Sydney, Melbourne, or Brisbane, you can get a mattress or a piece of furniture in 4 hours. In Japan, it's next day. So we talk about how can we improve that element of it. In Korea, it's the same thing. So that kind of thing. And also just looking at expansion into other markets. So obviously research was the driver in terms of seeing the opportunity in Korea. And for the future, we'll be doing the same as well. So it's a lot more, I guess, forward thinking, because we're looking into the future a lot more now.
Awesome. And speaking of kind of, customer user research is basically baked in with a third of your team doing customer service, right? Like, so that's every day you're learning something without even like having to create a campaign or create a market research plan, basically. So that means your team has a bunch of consumer insights, basically over the years you've been able to gather. So anything like that you want to share about kind of like how that's shifted, or like what you've learned, anything interesting around that from that perspective?
I guess the surprises that have happened to us, essentially, right?
Yeah. You don't mind.
There's quite a few on a regular basis. So to give one example, in the beginning, we were very much focused on talking about the fact that we're Australian made. There was a sense that was unique. As a brand that really talks about sustainability, we were very much focused on that. So the core pillars in the beginning were Aussie made and sustainability. And then we probably learned after the first year, through talking to customers and looking at the market and researching, et cetera, that there's probably a bit more of a job in terms of discussing product benefit to Japanese customers. There was a need, as the first online mattress retailer, we really needed to talk about, things like the benefits of buying online. We have a 120 night trial, things like that. So they need to be a lot more direct, is an evolution that we experienced. And the other thing is, in the beginning, we very much thought Australian made was a benefit for us, as mentioned, but the definition of Australia seems to have evolved to the Japanese customer. There's a sense that Australia to a Japanese customer, based on the research, is, cafes, beaches, sports, open space, which is obviously a big thing in a very, very space constricted place like Japan. But what we found is, instead of the Aussie made being an actual benefit, it's more around the lifestyle benefits of Australia. The fact that, life in Japan is quite stressful. And talking about that Australian lifestyle could be an unlocker to essentially a more stress-free, better lifestyle. So we talk more around, I guess, product benefit and Australian lifestyle is probably the big thing for us now.
Got it. And is the sustainability portion of it,
yes.
Has that shifted at all, or is there kind of like a connection still with that part of like your messaging?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in the beginning, as mentioned, we did somewhat deprioritize it, but over the past couple of years, there's been a really growing awareness of sustainability and interest in just sustainability in general in Japan. When I checked, I think last year we saw the Google term for sustainability in Japanese grew by 200 to 400% over the last couple of years. And we've now seen other brands come in, such as Allbirds, which I'm sure everyone knows. And probably a few years ago, if they'd launched, maybe they wouldn't have been so successful, but now they've been this huge viral sensation. They launched a couple of years ago, and sustainability is really a core part of their message. So I think there's definitely been an evolution in the Japanese customer, and looking at that now means there's more opportunity for us to talk about that part of our brand. So we've definitely increased the focus on that as well.
Has that, so from a user standpoint then,
Yep.
with the messaging kind of like shifting a little bit, or other certain messages becoming more important, has the demographics shifted also in terms of like your product market fit, or who you're trying to target?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the beginning, we very much thought our core demographic was probably 30 and up, mainly due to, I guess, down looking at income shifts in Japan, etc. And our product is high quality at an affordable price, but the Japanese customer, I think 50% of customers buy a mattress that's under $200 in this country, whereas we're probably, in US terms, probably something like $500 to $1,000. So that's how you justify that. But we've actually found over time that our core demographic is actually 25 to 34. And a lot of people in their mid to late 20s actually do purchase from us. So people living in the city, and surprisingly, quite a few 18 to 24 do as well. So as a result, we've also shifted our marketing to appeal to those people. So we shifted probably from young families, I would say, mid 30s and up, to more towards targeting millennials living in the city. And now we're probably evolving to do a little bit of both as well. So that's been an interesting shift for us along the journey.
Got it. And Koala's ability to kind of like raise people's expectations, or ability to pay more, I guess, for a bed probably helps. Like, it's rising tide, right? Like, so Brain Sleep, one of the competitors, in some ways, in other ways, it's very different value proposition, but they're also a higher price product. And so I do feel like you guys entering and helping kind of like get people comfortable with spending more on comfort and their sleep has helped other companies who are interested in that space.
I agree. And when you look at the US or Australia, for example, we were first in Australia as well. And then we saw other competitors come along. And I believe in the US it was Casper. But when the other competitors come along, I welcome Brain Sleep, for example, because it grows category awareness. Ultimately, we're a brand that focuses on getting customers to purchase the mattress online, and you're trying to shift that mindset of Japanese customers from needing to go to the store. So having Brain Sleeps, we now have 3 or 4 other competitors, means there's just more category awareness around that. So it's been positive for us.
Yeah, and I mean, all of you players are trying to help Japanese sleep better, which they need to do.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
I think there's quite a few studies that talk about the Japanese amount of sleep or lack thereof. Compared to the rest
the
of
lowest average in the world, right? And I think we recently did a bit of a insights dip, and we found that it's actually gotten worse due to COVID, because people, I guess probably the same in the US, working longer hours.
Somebody's, I think we're good. Go ahead.
Oh, good.
Okay, yes. All right, so moving on, in terms of, so your company's growing, like, when we first worked, when you first launched, it was basically the founders, honestly, like kind of planning international expansion, things like that. Like Japan's been a very successful market for you guys. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of that growth and how user research or market research has dictated the decisions? And that's part of it. The other part is, do you push back sometimes with this team in Australia and just basically show them the data and be like, yes, that may be the truth in Australia, but in Japan, it's not gonna work, or the messaging won't fly, or those kinds of conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of the success in Japan, I think it's definitely been iterative. We've done a lot of research essentially every single year. We've seen, like, as mentioned, things like sustainability increasing. When that happens, we try to shift our messaging to suit the customer, etc. We've also learned that quite a few of our products we've actually tried to improve along the way. To give you one example, we launched a pillow back in, I think, early 2018. And it was very, very popular with customers, but we actually found over the course of time, through talking to customers, that although they found it comfortable, it was a little bit too thick for Japanese people. And we looked in the data and found that in Australia, a higher proportion of people sleep on their side. And as a result, they tend to search for a thicker pillow, because obviously the gap between, I guess, your face and your shoulder and the bed is a certain thing. Whereas in Japan, we find the majority sleep on their backs. A high proportion do, at least anyway. And we believe that's down to the fact that there's a culture of sleeping on futons, on hardwood floors. So you want that back support. So as a result, there's more focus on, I guess, neck support, but also the fact that people tend to want a firmer, thinner pillow, because obviously if you have a thick pillow, it messes with your posture. So as a result, we actually shifted the product. So things like that we've done along the way as well. I believe your next point, I think, was around HQ.
HQ, kind of like they have a global brand strategy now and a global kind of insights team.
Sure. In terms of educating HQ, so obviously with COVID, there has been challenges, but usually we would fly over insights teams, or we've flown over the CEO before, marketing teams to talk to customers, also just see the lay of the land in the market. So that's been a really, really beneficial educational tool. In terms of pushing back on HQ, they do listen a lot. So we make sure we do that. We essentially have a weekly check-in across all departments to listen, and customer service is a big part of that. So we listen to what we're hearing from the customers, and that feeds up into HQ as well. But I would say it's constantly iterative. There's never a perfect solution for that, and there is, you need to remind people of the differences constantly, because at the end of the day, an Australian home is just significantly larger than Japan. It's a different type of customer as well, so you just need to be constantly reminding and, I guess, showing the differences. And I would advocate for doing almost constant insights checks as well. We've done, in terms of our brand awareness, for example, for our creative, we've probably done, I believe we've done 3 this year, just to look at how our above the line campaigns are performing and how customers are reacting to it, and that then informs everything you do.
Right.
So I think it's about regularity and reminding and being iterative.
Yeah, I think that's something that, brands understand. When entering the Japanese market overall, it's like you do that initial research to kind of dictate what your value proposition initially is going to be, what kind of product changes need to happen, how to create messaging if it's going to resonate, things like that. But now that you've been in country for 5+ years, right? Like the purpose is the same. You want insights, but that being said, there's also this kind of understanding that it's being done differently, and the purpose is a little bit different. Like, like you're obviously you're in market already. So you're trying to make, I'm guessing, smaller changes. How do you make those decisions? Like, as you get these insights, how are those decisions being made in terms of like what research will dictate changes to messaging, marketing, product, whatnot?
Sure. We are even though we've been here in market for 4 years, we do move very, very fast. We're very in-house, and I guess like a very typical direct to consumer type company. So we would conduct, for example, with the brand awareness dips that we've done a couple over the course of this year. And through learning about our recent brand awareness spikes, we've actually seen that our brand awareness has gone up from around 1 to 2% aided a couple of years ago to close to around 10 to 15 in Japan. And now it's about figuring out, well, our brand awareness has increased, but where are the other areas where we can improve, for example? And we found that, we can probably improve at consideration, for example. So I guess when looking, I guess we'll talk marketing for just a split second, but in terms of a funnel, we're doing well at the awareness stage, but we can improve in terms of driving customers further down. So we look at that, and then that informs future campaigns. And in terms of, I guess, when we do that, it's when the insights come in, if I'm honest. We try to be as quick as possible. We do conduct market research probably at least once a quarter.
Okay. And a question just came up around in my head, not through the chat, by the way. But you were talking about how in Australia, you order matches, you get it within 4 hours, right? And I'll be honest, when I think of Japan, I think, oh, if I'm going to order something, I'm going to get it really quickly. And it's usually the mindset of, oh, I'm in Tokyo, everything's closer. How have you decided, like, what the ideal time that Japanese will wait, or what they expect in terms of if they order matches? And other things to consider, like, honestly, is like, in Australia and the US, other markets, if I have a mattress coming in 4 hours, I'm not worried about my old mattress. I'll just put it in another room, most likely, or in the garage or something, right? In Japan, or Tokyo, it's a much different experience, right? So like, that's probably something that if I'm an American who's never been to Japan, I wouldn't even think about that. Right. So has that played, maybe I'm answering the question as I'm talking about, has that played a part into how you make decisions around
definitely
some of the experience?
We've definitely had some surprises there. So early on, we wanted to do the 4-hour delivery in Japan. And then we looked in the data in Japan, and we found that our customers, even though they have the option to get it delivered next day, the average customer gets it delivered 10 days later. And we find the reason for that, it's a cultural thing where Japanese people, we tend to plan in advance everything a lot more, and they'll wait for the weekend because people work late, so they can't actually get it delivered during the week, for example. So that's definitely played a factor. And we focus more on making sure we have I guess a large quantity of delivery windows during each specific day, so you can so you can choose on that specific day you want exactly what time you want it delivered. In terms of, what was the second part of your question? I apologize. Was it around?
I feel like you answered the question. And so, like, the second part of my question. No, I think honestly, in my head, that was the exact answer I was looking for.
Sorry.
Like, I started listening, and then all of a sudden I was like, I forgot the other part. So that works. So we're just over the hour. This has been super interesting. I want to make sure that I get to questions also. And honestly, there's a couple of questions, directed to you. We're going to go through those, and then we're going to bring back Yuriko and Chika also to, like, answer any questions that people may have just around doing user and market research in Japan. But I know that one of the questions may be that initially, what are the similarities, differences between the Japan market launch and the Korea market launch? It's not directly tied to user market research, but I think people are interested, like, how the differences are, what they are.
Yep, definitely. So I would say key differences in Japan, obviously the scale of the company was also at a different stage. So we weren't resourced as appropriately. We only had myself, and then we slowly built out the team over the course of time. In Korea, because we're at a different stage as a business, we've hired a lot quicker as a result. And I would say we've taken a lot of the insights around the need to build consensus with the customer very, very quickly. So I would say our marketing in Korea at launch is a little different to when we first launched in Japan. And I'd also say in Korea, we probably had a 6 to 8 month lead time, until we actually launched the product. Whereas in Japan, we did it quite quickly and then tested and learned as we went. As startups do. So that was a key difference. And then in terms of the customer itself, there's also a couple of key differences. We found that, in Japan, it's very much around, the space itself is quite small, as I'm sure you would know. So we very much focused on mattress in the beginning, and I guess, as mentioned, the functional benefits and really communicating around quality sleep. Whereas in Korea, there's a little more of, I guess, a culture of spending more, I guess, splurging on the home, on big ticket items. So we've actually launched with not just mattress, but sofas as well, which are doing really well. So I think that was a key difference. We didn't launch our sofa in Japan until a couple of years ago. So it would have been 2 years into launch. So I think that is a key difference as well in terms of product offering. Very much a mattress company at first in Japan. In Korea, full furniture.
Okay. Very interesting. And I see a question from Eric. Does the Japanese select the foreign brand more easily over a local brand? I think he said that Hong Kong, Macau would choose products from Australia and New Zealand over local products 85% of the time. It's easier, for example, honey is an example they brought up.
I think this would depend on the category. There's a sense that there's definitely a lot of evidence that for certain categories, foreign equals high quality. Like luxury goods, for example. I think cars is probably a good example. And within mattress, we've definitely spoken of, we've billed ourselves as, an international player coming into the market. And I think that can, from a brand perspective, can be very, very powerful. But it's also true that I would say that Japanese customers like Japanese made products. And I think there's a benefit to both. And again, varies category to category. I mean, John, what do you think on this actually?
So 100% agree on kind of the category piece, right? So if we're talking about historically, hardware related products, if it's made in Japan, it's people will choose that over. What is interesting though, is there is like, especially when we're talking about cars, right? There's this whole like interesting, I think Jeep is fairly popular in Japan.
Yeah,
right? Which kind of surprises me. I would never think that. But I think part of it is like also niche groups of people who are interested in kind of more foreign experience. I also think it's probably been, and this is 100% anecdotal right now, but there's probably been a shift as more and more Japanese become comfortable with traveling and becoming more global and seeing outside of Japan, right? Like my generation and older, like my family would have never traveled outside of Japan necessarily. And when I say my generation, I mean, we're talking 40s, 50s, 60s, and so I think that plays a part in the mindset of like, if you visit somewhere, you maybe drive a Jeep in the US and you're like, wow, this is a nice car, or this is a fun car, this is different. And so that's kind of my thought around that. But yeah, in terms of the mattress, it's an interesting question because you guys were the first to market with that kind of product. Right. So you weren't competing with local. You were competing, but you were competing with not apples to apples necessarily of the product. Right. So that there was education needed. It kind of also reminds me of many years ago when we worked with Square. Before Japan was a credit card, most people would have credit cards, but they weren't using them. It was a cash-based society. So there was education that not only needed to happen on the consumer side, but also on the merchant side and the people that were selling the dongles at the time and things like that. So understanding the whole ecosystem of who's going to be selling it, who's going to be buying it, and anybody in between, to be honest, which is a lot of people to kind of. So Chio-san says that offering not only the product benefit, but also Australian lifestyle. That's very interesting. Was there any struggles when you introduced Australian lifestyle benefit to Japanese people? And please, people, put questions in the chat. I'll either call them out, or if you want to ask yourself, say so in your message, please.
I would say it's still iterative. I don't think we've perfected the formula. We're learning along the way. In terms of the Australian lifestyle, it's something we've introduced over the course of the last 2 years. So yeah, I would say we haven't perfected it. There's still struggles in terms of how do you integrate a lifestyle message with the fact that, we know that Japanese customers, they need to be educated around, I guess, the product benefits and how it's going to impact their life. So there's always a challenge around how you tie those two together. So I would say that there are struggles. We're improving at it, but it's also, I would say, it's a process.
That all makes sense. Yeah, I understand. I have another question actually for all three of you. So, we're talking about doing user market research in Japan, and I think the answer differs partially on the size of your team, obviously the category. What if you're trying, like, I'll be honest, when I put my btrax hat on, I'm like, you should talk to us. But sometimes you're a very small brand, or maybe you're really interested in Japan and you just want to kind of dip your toe into kind of understanding how you would enter the Japanese market. If you're bootstrapped, do you guys have any advice on like first step or something to do that you cannot kind of pass up initially if you're trying to learn about the Japanese market and your brand? and I apologize, this was a question I did not prep them for. So if you guys need a second to think about it, let me know. But it was something I was thinking of as we talked about Koala's growth overall too. Like, like your focus, your budget, your resources has shifted over the years, and you're able to gather a lot more insights that kind of dictate things. But at the beginning, it was very much of like, well, what do we need to know just to enter the market?
I mean, I definitely do think step one is the research piece. I would also make sure, one thing we've learned is sometimes there's questions around whether the research is relevant to the Japanese market via the fact that whether it's been looked at by Japanese local on-ground people or not. Our understanding is there are research agencies who do work in Japan, but don't necessarily have boots on the ground in Japan. And I think that's really, really important to ensure whatever research you're getting is coming from, I guess, a Japanese native perspective as well. We found that there's just so much difference between how people interact with the home in Japan versus Australia. So I think I'd prioritize whatever the category you're coming from to make sure that those insights are coming directly from the source, essentially. That's probably the first big learning for me. I might think of more, but Yuriko, if you guys have more. Chika.
I mean, honestly, I think that is the biggest thing. Like I've said it like multiple times in my slide as well, but it's just everything. Like there's so many things that I guess you wouldn't understand unless you're on site, and perhaps like, even just like little things like, oh, like we see this trend or something. Sometimes you don't know why that is. And that comes like from like, but the Japanese person, it's normal. And we can tell you anecdotally why that is. And honestly, those insights are really, really helpful in structuring your research. And there's some things that you should probably look into further. So definitely having person on site and a Japanese person looking over your research is, I would say, like the most important part.
Anything to add, Chika-san?
Yeah, I totally agree with you too. So as both of you guys explained already, Japan is quite unique market in terms of like language and culture. So we definitely need someone who knows the market and culture itself. And at the same time, I would say it's important to know yourself, know your brand once again. So it's good to know that what's your strengths and weakness by yourself is quite important before starting the new market research. So
yeah, and something else I thought of while you all were explaining, kind of talking about what needs to be done is something that I would recommend is if you're working with maybe a user researcher who's based in, let's say, America, right? They understand how to create that research kind of campaign, like the questions and things like that. But that's the other thing, make sure that whoever's going to be asking those questions looks over them and works with you to help you understand if those questions are going to work or not work, right? Like, so somebody may be an expert in doing user research in the US and be like, oh, we need to know these questions, the answers to these questions. But if they don't make sense to the Japanese person, push back or be like, ask, politely, let them know that you really should be structuring it this way because you'll get better insights, things like that. So I've seen it where, maybe it's a global market research firm that is doing a project for a large brand and going in the Japanese market, but they don't have anybody on the ground. That's something to think about or think through. We do have a couple other questions. Yay. Amy from Supertext, I believe, yes, asked, what platform did Koala use to communicate the benefits and overall branding?
Yep. So I guess the key one, obviously the website is very, very important. That's your front page. Social media, our core demographic is millennials, so we want to make sure we're on those channels. So from a channel perspective, I would say Instagram is fast, quickly growing in Japan. Facebook plays a role, but it's more used like LinkedIn in Japan, so we prioritize it slightly lower. Twitter is also very important, and YouTube is a platform we've had a lot of success with. So I'd highly recommend a strong YouTube strategy, particularly. We've had a lot of success with TrueView, which is a paid skippable media. You can reach a lot of people to communicate your brand benefits there. I also find we learned early on that a lot of our success in terms of communicating the brand benefits came from PR, talking talking to actual media and trying to, find talking points essentially for your brand, whatever your product is, your message, that is something that other people want to talk about. And the Japanese customer, as mentioned, is very consensus based. There's an oft-led saying that is, the nail that sticks out must be stuck back in, for example. So if you can create a sense that other people are using it, and it's trusted, that's your biggest key. Trust is the biggest key to success in the market. And in Japan, it's very much dominated by certain media outlets. If you can find yourselves onto, for example, national TV via some kind of PR activation you do, or digital media that people trust, it's very, very powerful. So that would be my strong recommendation. That was a really core part of our success in the first 2 years in terms of getting our name out. So
it's really good to hear. Actually, you brought up website as kind of like that main tool for education, right? And we all know that typically in Japan, websites look a little bit different than maybe in the US or Australia, right? And this was something that we actually looked into with your team back in the day of like, how do you take kind of the nuance of a foreign brand that maybe it's fun and kind of like a startup and things like that, and build that trust with a Japanese consumer, but but not necessarily turn it into a Japanese website, like a very busy website per se, right? Like how the three of you actually could probably help answer some of these questions around how do you make those decisions, hopefully through research on what to put on the website, where to maybe veer a little bit away from the brand look, so that you can build that trust in Japan.
Yeah, definitely. Yuriko, Chika, you might be better to place to answer this, but in terms of my point of view, I would say that it's definitely a balancing act. So to give you in a nutshell, the case study of Koala, when we launched in Japan, we very much launched the Australian website translated into Japanese, because we were trying to just launch into market. And over the course of time, we learned very quickly, the Japanese consumer tends to desire a lot more information. Information density is very important. If you go on a site like Rakuten.jp, the product pages, they're extremely long. It's around density of information. And it's not necessarily that the customers read every single thing. It's around trust again. People like knowing it's all there. It looks legitimate and things like that. So over the course of time, our website in Japan is definitely a lot more information dense than the Australian one. We talk a lot more directly and in detail about the key product benefits that they care about, more about our brand story, et cetera, as well. But I would say, to contrast that, there's also over localization when you overdo it. And I think some brands will almost load up with too much text. And we've made that mistake too as well. So you need to kind of just search for that balance. Like a good example of a company that, like companies that do it well, I would say, like Nike and Apple, for example, when you go to their website, it's a global brand. Their Japanese website has a little bit more information, but it's also not massively information dense. It's still very clean, and it communicates their brand in a really effective way. But yeah, Chika, Yuriko, what do you guys think?
Yes, I'd say it will be different depending on who your target is. For example, like for Gen Z, they're familiar with getting the information from website, and they're really focusing on what their brand body is. So I would say like brand story, what's your vision and mission is super important for them. But in general, as John said, it's quite important to build trust through website. So I would say to put local case studies is really important. Yeah, I think it's quite required, not only translating the case studies in your country, because people feel like if the case study is not in Japan, okay, this is something in different country, so it could be different for me. So yeah, I think to put local case study is quite important.
I totally agree with everything. I think reliability is definitely something I've seen as super important as for any client project as well. And it kind of goes back to one of the examples that I mentioned as well, like the characters, like people will pick up those differences, and although it's the same character, it makes sense, we see it, but we do notice that it's different from the Chinese characters, it's different from the ones we use, and people will pick up on those. And will kind of get this like weird like sense of like, oh, it's a bit different and it's weird, and people pick up on that. I think to kind of keep in mind, it's more minute, maybe more minute detail, but I've noticed that a lot of users in Japan access websites through their phone rather than their computer. And Japan is a very mobile first country. So you want to make sure that your website does adapt for that. Just kind of be aware that that's kind of their main source of information. So I would add to that. I would add that point.
Very good, very good. Thank you. This is an interesting kind of question around what's been trending, I would say, in the last year or so. So Eric's in the NFT space. Will it be hard to market an intangible product in Japan over something like a mattress or something tangible? Any thoughts on, honestly, like I do feel like it's hard to answer until you've done the research, just in general, people that understand the space. Like, let alone if you're talking about a company or a brand, right? Like, it's definitely going to be much more niche. But do you guys have any thoughts on two parts, how to market something that's intangible, but also maybe how to market something that a lot of education is needed? We talked about that with Koala, but this is a little bit different also. Chika, do you want to go first?
I can start.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, sorry. My general impression, this is more like my general impression, especially, is that the overall, when we're talking about the overall Japanese people, I feel like they are not as familiar with these concepts of blockchain and all these, especially with like having data on cloud. Even at that point, a lot of people aren't really tech savvy as you expect, and the cryptocurrency and all these concepts are very new to people, and people are uncomfortable. I don't think they feel as secured with dealing with these things because they simply don't know. So there will be a lot of thought needed in educating the mass. I would say though, I know like NFT could potentially have a really good affinity with more like art and like manga, anime, those kind of products. And I would say that like in Japan, people who are really, really familiar with that products and are really like familiar with that culture tends to be the tech savvy ones in Japan. So maybe you'll have like good like affinity and maybe less education needed and have more easier entry with that demographic first than the mass. That's kind of like my first impression, but I would say do research. It's kind of back and forth.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, speaking about only NFT, I guess the target is not a mass, so it's a little bit limited target. So if we use like, let's say local influencer or someone in local and keep educating the users, like how good it is, what benefit they can get, stuff like that, then I would say it's not hard, even if it's intangible. Yeah, that's my answer to that question.
Anything to add, Shota?
I guess, yeah, I would say for NFT specific, actually last week I went to an NFT art show in Tokyo. So it's kind of a little bit top of mind. And this is more, I guess, my personal view on it. Then I don't have too much data around it. But for a niche product, I would look online for small communities. They do exist. When you look at, the Japanese, I guess, people in general, they tend to focus on one niche hobby and be very, very strong at it. There's a lot of, we call it otaku culture here, right? Where people they're really obsessed with one thing, and that would 100% exist for NFTs. And it's just around how you find that community. So I think that's one. In terms of education, I would utilize influencers too. They played a huge role in our growth in terms of educating the customer about the product benefits we have. And I think that would be the same for a new service, new things such as NFTs. So I agree with that one.
Right. Any other questions? We do have, what was the negotiation? So I'm just reading this without checking it first. So apologies if I don't read it correctly. What was the negotiation process like in a nutshell in terms of overcoming any regulatory things you've dealt with trying to enter into the Japanese market? I do have some thoughts on that, by the way. Like I remember that we had, I'll just add this before, we did find a partner. So btrax did not handle any of that, but we found a partner for you guys to work with in terms of how to handle all the logistics and make sure that anything that you had to have on the mattress, like the information kind of tag and things like that, that was covered and things like that. But I don't really remember anything around any deep regulatory issues that you had to address.
Feels like a long time ago now, but yes, definitely. I would highly recommend finding a local partner for this. Japan is, when it comes to bureaucracy and these kinds of regulatory type things, it's very, very, a lot of it is quite old school, I would say as well. So I would find a way to find, I would definitely find a partner that's local to your industry. I guess that would be my answer to that, to be honest. We definitely face regulatory issues also with logistics. I'm trying to think back, sorry. We definitely learned along the way. To give you one example, we set up all regulatory issues were overcome when we launched the mattress. Our mattress also comes with a toy, like a small mattress, a small koala doll to symbolize the koala. And we learned along the way that we didn't actually have the regulatory. We essentially, what we had at the time wasn't fit for purpose. So we had to adapt to that. So I think that kind of thing you need to keep an eye on along the way. That's one. And then you're also going to notice things like setting up bank accounts. I don't know if this isn't 100% relevant, but Japan is a country that still uses a lot of paper and fax machines. It's in that sense, it's very, very much, it's a different era in some respects. So I would be ready for that. In our case, we hired an office manager / HR person as our third or fourth hire. We probably wouldn't, startups usually don't hire HR super early, but in our case, it was hugely beneficial because for setting up those office managery type bank accounts, I guess you might have to deal with things like payroll as well. Probably diverged a little bit. I would highly recommend having someone like that in-house on ground.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're running low on time, so I wanted to end with, if there's one thing, one key takeaway, one insight you would like everybody to leave with today, what would that be in terms of user or market research in Japan? And I don't know who wants to go first. I'm happy to call out, but if anybody wants to go first, just let me know.
I can go first. It's kind of just going to connect to an earlier point, but I would really finding a way to listen to that in-house, like a local team, as mentioned earlier, dig deep and really listen for their point of view. Sometimes, even if you hire people in Japan, it's a culture where we're not taught to speak up, and very much around that nail in that must stick out, etc. So I would really make sure that you try to find a way to listen to them for their in-country insights as deep as possible. That's probably mine. And
make sure they understand your space.
Yes,
and just one of the things I'll add on to that, because I'll try and add value to each one of you. Just their ability to speak English isn't enough, I would say. So having them understand how to do the research or understand like how your product or your brand would fit in the Japanese market initially, I think will be key also. Yuriko or Chika-san?
Yes, I want to say don't forget to research your brand itself, because it makes much easier and faster to do the market research and to enter the market itself. So of course, local research is super important, but at the same time, don't forget to know yourself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Yuriko-san.
I think my point would be basically the same as the presentation, and it will be very similar to Shota-san's, but basically localize the material, localize everything about your research, and just so that you are getting the most out of it. And as you may have noticed, that simply translating doesn't really work well. And there are a lot of nuances that go into the phrasings. And if you want to be sure how your questions are being perceived by the Japanese, and they're going to be different than when you're just doing it on US or anywhere else. So have another local person look over it and make sure that you solve all these issues, you know what you're asking, and then go into research.
Very good. Thank you very much, Shota, Yuriko, and Chika. I mean, the hour and a half flew by. Everybody who attended, please fill out the survey feedback form that is in the chat. We'll also be emailing it out. We're always looking to improve. Also, please feel free to follow up with us. Go on our website if you want to download our free ebooks, check out our blog to get insights. But yeah, make sure you do research when you're interested in the Japanese market, even if it's kind of that initial check in to see, even if you have brand sentiment or any type of opportunities. So thank you, everybody. I hope everybody has a wonderful day, evening, rest of your morning. But again, thank you, speakers, for sharing some amazing insights. So
Thank you very much.
bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Let's get some
everyone.
of
Thank
this.
you for your time.